Well, hello and welcome to That Girl's Quilting Threads and Things. My name's Diana, and this is my channel, a channel where I try to share with you, the viewer, tips and tricks on things that I've learned in my quilting journey, and hopefully can pass them along to you to make your quilting journeys just a little bit easier. So if there's anything in this video that you like, please feel free to hit that like button. And if you think others can benefit from these tips and tricks, or even just enjoying the pattern itself, please feel free to share. And I do want to say thank you so much to all of those of you who have subscribed. I'm very humbled. Now today's video is round 4 of Walk Around the World with Great Grandmother Savita. If you would like to follow along with the whole project, there's a link to the playlist in the description below. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with round 4 of Walk Around the World with Great Grandmother Savita. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with round 4. So in round 4, we're going to have focus fabric. And remember, your focus fabric is going to be cut at 4.5 inches square. So you're going to need 4 squares of your focus fabric C, 8 squares of your focus fabric D, and 4 squares of your focus fabric E. Now for our flying geese combinations, we're going to be making 4 different combinations of flying geese, and we're going to be making 8 flying geese in each of those color combinations. So for our flying geese, they're going to be made using the 4 at a time, no waste method. And for each of these color combinations, you'll be making 8 flying geese in total. So for your peak fabric, which is always going to be your large square, you're going to cut them at 5.25 inches. And when you cut your small squares out, which is going to be your sky pieces, you're going to cut those at 2 7/8 inches. Using the following combination, you'll need 2 from your background fabric N, which is your light background fabric, you'll need 2 large squares. From your accent fabric J, you'll need 8 small squares. For the next set of flying geese, you're going to use 2 large squares for your peak fabric, 5.25 inches, 8 small squares, 2 7/8 from your dark background fabric O. Next, you'll be making 8 flying geese. You'll have 2 peak fabric pieces, O, and you'll cut 8 squares, 2 7/8 using your accent fabric K. Your last set of flying geese, you'll need to cut 2 large squares out for your accent fabric K for your peak, and you'll cut 8 small squares at 2 7/8 using your background fabric N. Now if you'd like a detailed walkthrough on how to make your flying geese 4 at a time, no waste method, the second video in this series goes over rounds 1 and 2, where we go through how to make the flying geese 4 at a time, no waste method. So I encourage you to check out that video. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description to the entire playlist as it's been released so far, so that you can follow along in this project. Alright, so the first step in doing the flying geese 4 at a time, no waste method, you're going to make sure that you mark the back of all of your small squares. So to mark them, you're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of my small squares. And what I'm also going to do is, as I'm done marking my squares, I'm going to go ahead and put those small squares with the peak fabric that it goes to. That way I'm kind of just making sure that I don't get my small sky pieces mixed up with a different combination. So to prepare your flying geese for their first pass, or their phase 1 process, take one of your small sky fabrics, line it up on your peak fabric, your large square, so that your raw edges are flush with each other, and that the diagonal line that you drew is headed towards the other corner. I tend to pin because the cutting instructions for the 4 at a time, no waste method leave very little to no wiggle room for misaligned fabric. And also, when you do make this first pass and you cut, everything is now going to be considered on the bias. So you really want to take your time and be accurate with everything, so that your flying geese will come out as perfect as possible. So when I look at my flying geese unit, I should see one continuous line without interruption. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin the rest of these so that we can take it to the sewing machine and stitch out our first pass. Alright, so I'm going to take these over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew 1/4 inch on the left and right side of the diagonal line. Now notice that this side is, this particular sky piece is on top, so I will feed each one of my units through where the sky piece is on top, so that way as I make my first pass it will help to anchor this piece down. Sometimes if you go in the opposite direction, if you're not paying good close attention, you might, when you sew from the opposite end where the sky piece is underneath, sometimes you might get a ripple or something, and that can cause your sky piece to be misaligned. Alright, so let's go ahead and get these over to the sewing machine and make our first pass. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so I'm going to continue stitching these out and we'll come back when we're ready to make our first cut. Alright, let's get these cut up. Now let's get them pressed. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and prep these up for phase 2. Same as before, only this time you're going to take your remaining corresponding small squares and you'll pin one small square with the diagonal line going straight through the center of these what might look like cat ears. And I did find that because there is little to no wiggle room with the cutting measurements, that it might be helpful to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so gently nudge your fabric into place and pin it. So I'm going to continue to put the remaining sky pieces on our flying geese units and we'll take it to the sewing machine. We're going to go ahead and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance or a scant, whichever you prefer, on the left and right side. When I feed these through, I'll actually start here and work my way down this way. The reason why is to help make sure that this, if I start this way, it's liable to create an additional pucker. So I found that when I'm making flying geese using the 4 at a time method, starting here and sewing my 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides, I get a much flatter finished project and I have less rippling up here. Alright, so let's go ahead, take it to the sewing machine. Alright, same as before. I'm going to cut these right down the center on your drawn line. You can make multiple cuts at one time if you've got a ruler long enough and you're comfortable enough. Simply lay a ruler down point to point. Time to press. When I am pressing them, I will gently roll it open and then I'll put my iron flat on top of them. That helps me, one, to make sure that it's open, but two, I avoid stretching the fabric by trying to use the iron to push it all the way open. But I think there are different techniques. It depends on how much experience you have and what you're really comfortable with. Alright, so once you've got your flying geese all pressed, it's time to go ahead and square them up. Your flying geese, before they're put into the chevron block, need to be 2.5 inches deep by 4.5 inches wide. Normally what I do to square them up, I'll take my ruler. My ruler has a set of crosshairs on it that I can use to make sure that those 45-degree lines are running parallel with the peak and sky pieces. So I have a nice triangle there, and I'll make sure, and I'll get a straight edge. So I'll cut off whatever's sticking out, and then I'll turn it around. And now that I have a straight edge to work with, I'll go ahead and line up my 2.5 inch line, and I'll cut out whatever sticks out. And now I have two nice straight parallel edges. Now I can simply take and line up my line. So I have a nice line there, and I can just take and line that up with the edge. And I know that I need my 2 1/4 inch mark to be right in the center of that peak. And if I have it lined up just perfect enough, this 45-degree line will run exactly parallel between my peak and my sky fabrics. And that 1/4 inch line will line up exactly in the center. So then I can just go ahead and once again cut whatever's sticking out, flip it around, apply the same procedure, line that same line up here with the edge. And if this 45-degree line, the way I have it lined up, if this 45-degree line is running exactly, again, parallel between, on the seam between the sky piece and the peak fabric, then that 1/4 inch seam line, that 1/4 inch metric mark right there should be right in line with the peak of my flying geese unit. Everything is nice and lined up. And once again, just cut whatever's sticking out. So now I'm going to go ahead and square up the remaining flying geese unit, and we'll come back and we'll show you how to put the chevrons together. Okay, so now we have all of our flying geese put together, and we've gotten them squared up. And just something that I observed, so when I did the scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, I did a 1/2 and 1/2 test, right, just to see how much more wiggle room a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance would give me as far as flexibility in case I was a little off on my cutting or anything like that. So this bulk right here is all of the sliver dust that came from the 36 units. And the bigger pieces, which truly aren't too big, maybe 1/8 of an inch is the biggest width, those came from the flying geese units that I did a scant 1/4 inch on. So just to kind of give you some perspective on what it can do for you when you're putting together your flying geese units using the no waste method, sewing that scant 1/4 inch seam allowance does kind of help. So after you've got them all squared up like this right here, you're going to take your flying geese units now and you're going to turn them into chevron units. So the chevron units, when they're put together in an unfinished block, is going to be 4 1/2 inches squared. All right. So you're going to make 8 flying geese with this combination and 8 flying geese with this combination. Your flying geese units will always be made with the accent fabrics and your 2 different background fabrics. All right, so let's go ahead and take these to the sewing machine and make our chevron units. All right, so I have my flying geese ready to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the flying geese at the bottom end of the chevron, and I'm going to flip that over on top of the flying goose unit that has the larger accent fabric, where the accent fabric is the peak. All right, I'm going to line it up, make sure that everything is in place. I want to make sure that where this stitch line here and this stitch line here, where they crisscross, I want to make sure that I take my time going over this bulk here and that I'm on the right side of that crisscross. Because if I'm on the left side, I'm going to cut off my peak. And again, I'm going to slow down. All right, so let's just take a quick look and see how that turned out. So I am on the right side of that crisscross, but let's see how close that looks. When I go to press this, I still have my peak intact, so it looks good. I'm going to execute the same steps And I'm going to chain stitch all of these units together. So for our flying geese, we're going to go ahead and press them. We're going to press them the way the fabric wants to lay. So if you look at most of your flying geese, looks like it wants to go towards the top of your chevron, that part right there. So if I flip it over, notice how it's already navigating towards the top of that peak. What I'll do is I'll put my iron on it, gently roll it open, and press. And that's all there's really to it. And just to show you, we have a very nice sharp point there. So I'm going to go ahead and press all of these, and then I'll show you how to lay your rows and columns out. All right, well, let's go ahead and get these chevrons put into their proper place so I can show you how to create your rows and columns. Okay, so for our top and bottom rows, you're going to put, I'm going to make out both rows as we go along. So you're going to put your accent fabric C in the center. Then you're going to put 2 of this flying geese combination on either side of your center piece of your focus fabric. All right, and so to keep this in the same orientation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around, because this is the top row, this is the bottom row. And remember, our chevrons will always be pointing outward from the center of the quilt. Then you'll take 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom. You'll take focus fabric D and put 1 on either side, like that. After you have that, then you're going to put your other combination of flying geese on the very outer edges. That's your top and your bottom row. Now for your side pieces, what I would call the columns, for your left and right borders, you're going to create 2 rows exactly the same as this, 1 for the left and 1 for the right. And then for the outer edges of that, you will take your focus fabric E and you'll put them on the very ends. So if I slide this down just a little bit to give you a visual, on each end you will put your focus, one of your blocks from your focus fabric E. That is going to be for your left and right. So 1 on this end and 1 on the other end. So I'm going to go ahead and lay these out so that I have them all prepped up, and I'm going to start putting them together. Okay, so I'm working on my columns, my left and right sides. I've already done the top and bottom rows. Again, I like to do this in pairs. It just makes it easier and manageable. And then as I do my pairs, I put them back in the order that they're supposed to be, just so I don't lose track of that. All right, so now our left and right columns are ready. I'm going to give them a press, and then I'll show you the diagram on how to attach them. I'll attach the top and bottom rows, and then I'll go ahead and attach the left and right side. And then we can come back for a full review. And ta-da! I'm very happy with how well the points are coming out. They're lining up really well. My focus fabrics are made of very, very thin material, so they have been giving me some challenges when sewing them together along with the chevron blocks, because they have a little bit of stretch to them. So I'm trying very hard to make sure that I don't stretch, tug, or pull unless it's really super necessary to line something up. But so far, it's doing pretty well. Whew, round 4 is done. Wow. If you're sewing along with me, I hope that you had a great time with your project as we went through the steps together. And in this round, I really do believe that you can actually start to see the three-dimensional appeal of this pattern, using the alternating light and dark backgrounds, and then using the accent fabrics to help boost those focus fabrics to stand on top and shine, just like my great-grandmother did. Thank you so much for joining me today on today's journey. I hope that you continue to follow me along and join me for round 5 and walk around the world with great-grandmother Savita. So until then, may all of your quilting journeys be joyful, one stitch at a time.